We're currently in the quantum economy 2.0. What was 1.0, you ask? We clear all that up with someone who spent over 2 decades at NIST. We'll also explore the business outlook for various quantum technologies in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of the post-quantum era. So our guest today is the president of CJW Quantum Consulting, Carl Williams. Welcome to the show. He's interesting background-wise because he also spent over 23 years working at NIST, and that's certainly a that's certainly a name that appears on this podcast from time to time. So yeah, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Konstantinos.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background? I mean, you know, the whole NIST angle. You were there quite a while, so you must have seen it all emerge right before your very eyes.
Yes. So, my background is basically I have a PhD in very low temperature atomic physics. Started coming and engaging with people at NIST in the late 80s, early 90s. Was actually at NIST in 1994 when I think the first workshop on quantum information, quantum computing, quantum communications was actually put together in 1994. Meeting was shortly after Peter Shor had discovered Shor's algorithm. But this was the first meeting I know of, a workshop that was solely focused on quantum. I was just a visitor there in the background, but it was a lot of fun. In the 1998, I came to NIST full-time. I had spent a lot of time there in engaging, writing papers, doing research, collaborating. And in the year 2000, I agreed to coordinate the quantum information program that we started in that year. So, I've been doing quantum information for more than 2 decades, and the formal program at NIST is now more than 2 decades, even though there was some earlier work from Dave Wineland out in Boulder back in the early 1990s. So I've watched the whole thing. In 2008, I went to the Office of Science and Technology Policy and set up the first interagency working group around quantum information science, where we basically set government policy on this field. So, I've been involved in setting policy directives and everything else. So it's been fun watching things build out. And the last thing I can say is, all the way back in 2002, we had our first meeting with industry around this area. And I think there were people that even back then who were watching this field. So there were companies watching and wondering where the field was going. And we had a meeting in 2002 with industry, and in 2007 and 12 and 14 and 15. Okay, so you can see the increasing pace.
Yep.
So everybody's been knowing this technology was coming. And now there is a moving train.
Yeah, back then every meeting was, it's 10, 20 years away. And then it became 3 to 5 years away. And now it's still 3 to 5 years away, I guess, for some things. But it's obviously way more real. So you talked about how you were setting policy. So I'm assuming it's that kind of approach that you're bringing to your entire new venture, your consulting firm, right? That you created this like experience at helping companies figure out. I just wanted to ask you, like, what made you decide that you wanted to start consulting?
So, I want to watch the quantum 2.0 economy grow out. I mean, I've been involved in this for a long time, and I don't want to help any one company. I want to help the ecosystem as a whole. I think there are a lot of issues coming. I think this is a really hard topic. I think depending on the activity, if you look at the quantum computing companies, most of them believe that they will be spending more money than they bring in until around 2030 or so. So, it's going to take a long time for this economy to grow out. And yet, because it's so radical, so revolutionary, so disruptive, Um, Companies who think that they can adapt and adopt on this technology at the last moment, well, it'll be too late. So, this is a hard one to learn because it really is very, very disruptive. And I hate that word, disruptive or revolutionary, because it gets so misused. But again, think of what the 20th century would be like without the transistor or the laser. And those are just component technologies. And quantum information science is really a whole technological field.
Okay, so taking a step back for listeners, like you use the term quantum economy 2.0, and it's going to be appearing all over the show notes and everything. So if someone had to think of like what defines the quantum economy 1.0 and then how it becomes 2.0, like what would the two be, and what would that defining moment be that made it go from one to the other? Because like in the web, we know what that is. It's when they went from static websites to interactive websites, and then now to everything Web 3.0, they're hoping will be blockchain based. So what makes quantum economy 1.0 different from 2.0?
The reality is almost all the technology that we have today exists because of quantum mechanics. I mean, the transistor exists because there's a band gap and you can use it as a switch. And that comes from the fact that quantum mechanics has quantized energy levels and all. And there's nothing strange about that. The laser exists because of the wave properties of light. So we have a lot of technology, in fact, tremendous amounts of technology that are based on quantum 1.0, the so-called semi-classical properties of quantum mechanics. Quantum 2.0 uses a lot of quantum 1.0 technology, but it also has two concepts in it that are really very, very strange. And these are the concepts that Einstein really bothered Einstein. In fact, what most people don't realize, Einstein spent more of his life trying to prove quantum mechanics incomplete than he did in contributing to quantum mechanics. He would make comments like, God doesn't roll dice. So what are these two properties? Well, while a semi-classical object must be on or off, like that transistor, a quantum state, if it's really designed well, can be both on and off at the same time. An electron in a quantum system can be going to two separate slits at the same time. This process is called superposition. And the second one, which is even more weird, is called entanglement. And in fact, Einstein wrote a famous paper called the EPR paradox in 1934 that describes this one. So it is these strange properties that are quantum 2.0. And so what quantum 2.0 technology would do is use those things to do new things. And having said that, let me just say there is at least one example, very robust, of quantum 2.0 in the past century, and that is atomic clocks. And this is part of the reason NIST was so good at quantum information sciences, because we've been building clocks for 70 years. So there is a few examples of this. NMR is another one, but the reality is almost everything in the 20th century was quantum 1.0.
Yeah, and quantum 1.0 also limits machines and makes quantum 2.0 required. For example, if you build transistors too small, if you make the traces too small, the electron that's supposed to be here representing a 1 might tunnel and be over there and just throw off everything. So we've almost reached the limit of quantum 1.0 technology in some ways.
Yes.
So we're not going to be able to follow Moore's law forever. That's why we keep adding cores to CPUs and things. Yeah. So that's good. It's an important thing to point out. So this economy we're talking about is all the ways that we're taking advantage of these machines that are purely quantum, and obviously quantum computing is a huge part of that. But you don't focus just on quantum computing, right? Like you're interested in other applications of quantum technology.
I think this technology is going to have very broad impact. I mean, again, you can talk about integrated circuits and computers, but who ever thought that I would have a cray in my hand known as a smartphone? So the technology is going to impact communications. It's going to impact sensing. It's going to impact a lot of things. And in many ways, the technology will probably get used in many cases for doing better classical sensing. So again, I want to build the world's most sensitive single photon detectors, whether in the microwave or someplace else. How do I do it? I use some quantum 2.0 concepts and technologies. And in fact, If you look at the microwave background and its polarization, this is all building off of some very sensitive technology from Quantum 2.0. So I think it's going to be everywhere. And in fact, I think, in the quantum communications regime, the government published a report this past year on quantum networks. And the question is, what is the real use of a quantum network? And it may be that the real use of this is a sensing network, not a communication network. So I think there's a lot we don't know, and we're going to have to watch the technology build out to determine what the real value and the real use is.
Yeah, there's a huge cost overhead with quantum networks, obviously. We're going to have to build from the ground up on those. I get excited about quantum networks and their use for interconnect and having quantum computers sort of work as one quantum computer. That's an area I'm super interested in. And you're more interested, you think sensing will take off first as far as their use for quantum networks? Because sensing already is real, right? I mean, it's the most real quantum technology in some ways. So how do you think that'll be affected by the ability to have them all link up?
So I'll give two different examples. There's a company called Circumagnetics out of Nottingham, England, where they have taken a bunch of atomic magnetic sensors and built a magnetoencephalography system, a system to look at the magnetic responses from the brain. And it no longer requires a person to be confined in a chair with a big object that they can't move around in. And this is very important for studying people who have epilepsy or other things. So this is one example. The other example I give, and those are local networks, you're not really using entanglement between them. They're just individual sensors. But the other one I try to give at times to people when I'm trying to tell people we don't really know what it's used for is I talk about building a sensor network set out along the San Andreas Fault. And I build this network that are really just clocks that are extraordinarily sensitive to the gravitational potential of the Earth, and therefore can see micro tension building up in the San Andreas Fault. And I say, you build this, you entangle them, and you can watch this micromotion, and perhaps in 20 years, we'll be able to predict 2 weeks early that the worst earthquake to ever hit California is coming. And that gives us time to evacuate large parts of the Bay Area, perhaps saving millions of lives. So
and that could get better in the future.
Yeah.
Right. Like MRIs jump out, right? Like we think about the use case of machine learning combined with quantum and MRIs. Like if they can analyze 6 million MRI scans for people who develop tumors 6 months later, they could see the faintest things that a human being couldn't even detect. Would it be possible then to use something like that with these sensors and detect the kinds of pre-ripples that we didn't even know existed before?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, every large object, every object has vibrational motions. This is again required by quantum mechanics, and the Earth surprisingly has them. But until a few years ago, nobody had ever seen any of these motions of the Earth, and these are called relativistic geodesy. But effectively, what I'm doing out along the San Andreas Fault is using this to basically detect a fault line. I could also use it to detect volcanic activity and predict when a volcano might go off. So again, this sensing technology could be very, very sensitive and have very, very broad implications. And I like this kind of an example because it can't be hyped so easily. I mean, it is a possibility, I won't say it's going to happen. It is a possibility. But when if somebody uses words like the quantum internet, everybody assumes they know this is going to replace the classical internet. Well, it's not.
No.
And so there's no hyping of this kind of a concept because today there's no classical technology that could do this.
Yeah, and when you're talking to customers about this kind of thing, are you advising them both on potential uses they haven't thought of before and its economic impact, or are you focusing more on one side or the other?
So I think it's what's important for companies is that they understand how this technology might impact their business model. And some companies care about sensing, some care only about computing, some care about communication, some care about multiple things. And so I think you have to look at what the company needs, and then you can talk about the potential economic impacts it has on them. So I think you have to start from the point of what is your business model. And yes, companies want new business models, and I'm all for those new business models. But I think the main thing to think about is what's the potential economic impact of this technology on your current business processes, and then you can begin to think about new things you might do. So I prefer going up from that approach because I think it's too easy to get hyped on the other path, and unless you're a startup that's really just driving down a whole new path. And there are a bunch of startups in the arena.
Yeah, I was curious because like when we're consulting with companies, usually we're going right to the use case. Like they'll come and say, we want to do something with a quantum computer, and then we'll say, okay, well, you do portfolio optimization, and we can do it probably better with a quantum computer, hopefully, and then we go down that path. But it sounds like you're trying to give them that bigger picture view too, like of what's possible.
Absolutely. So when I talk to a broad audience, I give the example of relativistic geodesy and the sensor network. Mm-hmm. When I talk to a client, I basically try to understand their needs. And I often tell them if they're a big company, they should have a small team inside, because what they really need is quantum experts who understand deeply their business, because they will be the ones that will best be able to prepare them. And in fact, all the way back in 2002, this is one of the things I learned from the companies at that time. At that time, and I usually don't drop names, but Motorola no longer exists, so I'll drop Motorola's name. Motorola was at the meeting, and the VP for Motorola basically said to me, he said, look, we just spent 3 man-years evaluating this technology. It's not time for us to move. And I thought, 3 man-years, that's a lot of time and effort. In some ways I was shocked. And then I was saying, so how do you prepare? How do you know when it's time to move? And I think high-tech companies are all looking at this area because they're all trying to understand how this technology is going to impact them.
And the numbers you hear sometimes about the impact of the economy are huge, right? Like I keep hearing the trillion word appearing when they're talking about this industry over this decade, maybe. And it's like, it's almost mind-boggling. It's hard to imagine. But then you start to multiply how many companies are going to play in it and what's going to be involved, and you quickly get there. Do you use any kind of like specific sourcing for generating numbers like that to help customers understand? Is there anything you could really trust for predicting that kind of thing? It seems like everyone's guessing, right?
There are a bunch of companies that have come out with predictions of what the quantum computing market is, and they're all within a factor 2 or 3 of each other. They've used different methodologies and approaches, and I think they're all making fairly reasonable estimates. I think to understand the long-term impact, I try to give another example. I mean, you look at how much of today's world is impacted by the semiconductor industry, because it's everything from smartphones to computers to everything else. It's trillions and trillions of dollars. And this technology is, as far as we know, the most powerful technology will ever be developed based on the laws of physics, because you can't build something that violates the laws of physics. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I suspect that, by the end of this century, it won't surprise me if 20 to 30% of the economy depends on this technology in one form or another. So it is going to evolve in a manner, and it's going to be very disruptive. And companies who don't see it coming will lose. And again, this is something I learned back in 2002 too, because a different VP of one of the high-tech companies at that time said to me, I asked him the question, how do you know when it's time to move? And he says, when the ship leaves port, you better be on it, because companies go bankrupt because they miss evolutionary trends, because there are very few revolutionary or disruptive trends. So it's far harder to prepare for those, and companies need to spend more time preparing for those. And I think this is partly why companies are involved today in looking at this field. And I'm sure some of your clients are involved, in part because they want to be sure that they are prepared and understand how this might impact them, because you aren't going to do it at the last moment.
Yeah, it's like when we call people either leaders or fast followers or slow followers, like where do you want to be on that? And like, what will that really cost you? Have you, all the time you were at NIST, have you come across something that NIST viewed as an emerging wave, something that's going to change the world, and then they were just flat out wrong? I mean, maybe they didn't publicize it. I mean, quantum, let's face it, is getting a lot of press, but was there something in that time period where it's like NIST was sure that they had to start warning people or something? And then at the end, they were just like, yeah, okay, I guess it wasn't really a big deal after all. Did anything like that ever come up?
No,
To learn from,
look, I think we all sometimes miss, we think we have a cool technology that's going to displace something, but it's a technology. It's not, and this isn't one thing. This is a whole set of things. I think if you ask me to go make a prediction of what's going to be most valuable, quantum networks or quantum computing or quantum sensing, I'm going to shrug my shoulders. I mean, we can all guess it's probably quantum computing, but, and if I had to take a guess, I throw my eggs there. But yeah. I don't really have a clue. So I would say at NIST, I never saw a broad sector misguessed. People will misguess specifics, because you just can't always guess how rapidly something else is going to evolve or something else. But on the broad side, not really.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, some things have been misguessed overall because we didn't realize how important like IT would be, right? Like if you go back far enough, everyone's vision of the future was that by now we'd have personal jetpacks and flying cars. And no one realized that we'd be more focused on IT. That's why we didn't bother developing all that other stuff. So I was just wondering if there's anything like that came up at NIST, and then they were just like, whoa, yeah, it looks like that wasn't something we had to worry about after all, like behind closed doors or something. I thought that would be entertaining.
Not really. Like I said, you miss it, the application, the specific app. Oh, I never thought somebody would use it for that. You get shocked by the fact that somebody comes up with a new way of using a technology or a gizmo. And in fact, I think this is one of the benefits for the young people in this area. To learn a little bit about quantum is, look, you're going to have a perspective, and you're going to grow up with this technology, and you're going to have an ingenious thought that none of us ever thought about, because you've grown up with it. And we see this again with young people all the time. I mean, I know growing up, my daughter could sure reprogram my smartphone to do things I didn't know it could do far quicker than I could ever figure it out. And I'm tech savvy, I thought.
Yeah, the internet was a great example of that just throughout, right? When it first appeared, what did we think it was going to be? A billboard and like a way to communicate quicker. Like who predicted social media and things like that? I mean, it's just, we're barely scratching the surface there. And I have a feeling that's going to happen to quantum. The use cases will be pouring forward. So do you talk to companies then about how to find talent and how to build that part of it? Because it's not just about worrying about investing in the business, right? I mean, in the technology, you have to be able to have talent in this space. Are they concerned with that? Have they started asking those types of questions?
I think a lot of companies are concerned about the talent pool. I think the pressure is not as bad in quantum as it is in the AI field at the moment. But I mean, it is tough. And the reality is many of them are foreigners. So there's a whole immigration issue and where you get your talent. And most of the companies, even the small ones, the startups, they're already looking and saying, look, if I'm going to be successful, I have to be international. So they're opening offices abroad. So there's the internationalization. So I think, talent, and some part of that internationalization is sometimes that, if I want this specific aspect of quantum information, it's great to open an office there because there's a great talent pool nearby. And so, I think all this comes up in talking with companies. And in fact, what I really want to do with the companies is what are the common issues that need to be solved overall to ensure the quantum economy grows? What can I do with you and 3 or 4 of your competitors together that will raise the boats? Because I believe, the big high-tech companies are going to compete against each other royally and robustly and everything else. And I think what's important is that we create the ecosystem necessarily for them to succeed. That means having a good supply chain, being sure that we're doing technology protection in a manner that is both protects them, but allows them to compete globally. And so I think it's looking at all the big issues that evolved, and I think on the technology protection piece, basically how we do technology protection today really has evolved from the time of World War II, and it's really not been relooked at. And I think this is a great time to relook at how we do it. Because again, every company wants to protect its intellectual property, and yet they need to have a global supply chain. And that means, and offices in many places and locations. So it has to be an international effort, not just a one country effort.
On the topic of like an international supply chain, recently I thought it was interesting that we're starting to see examples of blocking certain types of technology from leaving, let's say, the U.S. That's already starting again. It almost felt like the crypto wars again, and like the days where we wouldn't allow a certain level of encryption to be sent overseas. We're starting to see that now. Like the U.S. doesn't want to send certain quantum computing technology to China, for example. That's already appearing. Do you foresee? How do you think that's going to shake out?
So I would look at it that it's not just the U.S. It is the high tech companies who no longer trust. I mean, China government has passed official policies that theft of intellectual property from others is perfectly okay, which it's not. I mean, you have to ask, well, what are the norms that we're going to compete around worldwide? And everybody has to agree by the same norms. And then there will still be people who disagree and go to court and fight and everything else. But at least there has to be a foundation or a basis for fair and equitable exchange and engagements. And that cannot including, well, the only way you can sell in my country is to turn over your intellectual property.
Yeah. So what would you see as like the biggest work that needs to be done for like a trusted international supply chain, like first, to keep this growing? Because it's obviously important.
Yeah, I think the things that you have to do is we all have to agree upon the rules, and we all want to also create an environment where we can help ensure that companies don't get their intellectual property stolen. That is governments have a responsibility to help protect the economic engines that drive their economies, and that protection should not be about helping steal, but it should be about helping ensure that those who want to steal, whether they are cyber criminals or nation states who don't respect intellectual property, that they are protected from. Because prosecuting somebody after they've stolen the crown jewels, the company's already lost. It's much better to prevent those interactions. And so I think we have to take a much more proactive and a stance, and we have to, as countries around the world, agree that we're going to do this and work collectively to protect what I will increasingly say are multinational corporations. Because again, many of the big companies, if you look at them, the fraction of their profits that are made abroad and everything else are quite large, and they manufacture abroad and they do many other activities. So we have an interest in protecting them because this is what drives the world's economy. And of course, that's all of us tax it. And so this is how our governments pay for each other. So there's a real responsibility to do this in a fair, equitable, responsible, and open and transparent manner.
So when we talk about things that could affect the entire economy when it comes to quantum technology, one of the biggest ones is obviously this threat, that we need post-quantum crypto to prevent. So, and NIST has, of course, been working on the finalists for ciphers. In working in that, did you get the sense that they were working on it just in case one of the big companies developed a machine powerful enough to reverse, let's say, RSA or something, or were they worried maybe also that there was something private going on, like some kind of nation state developing a machine that might not have been in the public eye?
So, I think we have monitored and followed the evolution of this field enough that I don't think there is any real nation state big effort going on that's going to surprise us. I mean, all the quantum physicists around the world know each other.
Mm-hmm.
We've been playing with this and talking about it for years. Back in the mid 2000s, I began to talk with our cybersecurity folks, which is where our crypto is done, and we started looking at companies and everything else. And so, we continue to monitor the companies and we look at their roadmaps and everything else, and we basically got to a point where we decided we had to go and begin to come up with new algorithms to replace the two asymmetric algorithms essential to establishing a good, secure communication links. And those are signature-based things and authentication-based algorithms. The AES, the symmetric piece that actually does the encryption for the final transaction, is perfectly safe, more or less safe. I mean, okay, you get a square root, but
getting into Grovers now,
but those other pieces we begin to realize, and then NIST has a long history of understanding how long it takes to replace all the public key infrastructure, and this is a decades-long effort. So I would say we're in a race now, and the race is a race between getting the algorithms there, getting standardized, beginning to get them out and in place, and having companies act in a quick and responsible manner, at the same time as the hardware companies are pushing their technology farther and farther. And we will call it a race because at least at the moment we believe reasonably confident that we can get enough of the crypto replaced that it's not a real risk to the global economy, but that will require everybody to do their part. That means people replacing all their crypto infrastructure in their companies, including on the back ends, which they may not even know they have, and hoping that the general purpose quantum computer that can break reasonable good encryption. Not all encryption out there is, some people still use legacy stuff, and there are a lot of small devices that have legacy stuff, but at least almost all the important stuff should be replaced in time before this computer comes around and is widely accessible.
Yeah, I definitely don't believe in the whole conspiracy thing that there's some secret quantum computer we don't know about or anything like that. For me, I think the big surprises are going to come either from some technology we hadn't thought up yet, like a way to make a better qubit, or a way to make machines work together like interconnect. I think that's going to be one of those two surprises I think will get us there faster than we might have anticipated. But I don't think it's some secret machine that's lurking in the world. It just seems hard to keep something like that quiet.
And Konstantinos, I agree with this. I think it is still possible that something disruptive may come along. But, each year that we go another step, and when you look at the roadmaps, I mean, these companies have numerous hard problems to solve, and they're not even just on the technology side. Some of them are on what I would call the classical side of it. I mean, you look at the kind of very low temperature cryogenic system you would need for some of these devices. I mean, this is a massive cryogenic system. Okay, we have examples of that. We use them at CERN. But they exist in very specialized locations, not running a computer.
So there are going to be engineering hurdles. Some of them we haven't even thought of yet, eventually when we try scaling. So it's always going to be tricky. So I really appreciate you sharing your decades of insight here. This was a really great conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Konstantinos. It was really a lot of fun, and I look forward to further engagement.
Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. The Quantum Economy 2.0 features the use of superposition and entanglement in technology, unlike Quantum 1.0, which was based on semi-classical technology like the transistor. This new economy will feature quantum computing, sure, but also networks and sensing. Sensing is already resulting in better medical scanning and will be applied in other fields like improved detection of coming earthquakes. Many companies involved in quantum computing will be spending more than earning until around 2030. Starting too late will make it hard to play catch-up though. Companies need to consider now what their business model is and what impact quantum will have on it later. When do you enter the fray? How much staff will you need to participate? Consider how Quantum 1.0 affected our economy last century. Transistor-based tech is found in trillions of dollars worth of industry. Quantum 2.0 could be 30% of our overall economy this century. There may already be global supply chain issues with Quantum 2.0. China has been known to not respect intellectual property rights. We're already seeing export regulations similar to what happened in the early days of cryptography. NIST is selecting new ciphers to combat the threat that powerful quantum computers will pose to cryptography. But companies will have to do their part and replace obsolete cryptography. This includes digging into legacy areas they may not even have accounted for. It takes time to replace crypto, and the time is now. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Carl Williams for joining to discuss the Quantum Economy 2.0. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protivity's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ConstantHacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protivity. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protivity.com or follow Protivity Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.